Both Detroit and Belle Isle had some of the most famous architects of their time, including Albert Kahn, famed for his factories, Cass Gilbert, George Mason, and Eros Saarinen, one of the leading modernist architects. During the early 1900s, Detroit grew exponentially. This was largely due to Henry Ford and his automobile assembly lines. Ford had people flocking from all over the United States, as well as foreign lands, to Detroit by offering the $5 workday. Other car companies like Dodge and Chrysler Motors soon followed suit, and by the 1920s, Detroit was fast becoming one of America's premier cities. Hudson's department store was now the largest of its kind, and the Detroit Tigers were on their way to winning a World Series. The Great Migration brought African Americans by the thousands from the Deep South north to Detroit. This influx of new emigrants to the city without adequate housing stock would cause racial tensions to boil over in the coming decade. Prohibition brought a boom of illegal activity to Detroit. The Purple Gang used the Detroit River as a way to bring illegal liquor from Canada into the United States. In the winter, when the river froze, hot rod cars sped across the ice and back, carrying the booze, and in the summer months, high-speed boats raced back and forth, always trying to outrun the law. Belle Isle was an easy launch point for bootleggers, as it sat right between Detroit and Canada and the Detroit River. Detroit was dubbed the Arsenal of Democracy by President Roosevelt during World War II, quickly changing its auto factories over to munitions factories, making bombs, planes, and tanks. As men were called up to serve overseas, women picked up the slack on the home front and went to work in Detroit's factories, doing their part for the war effort. At the end of the war, Detroit held a huge V-Day celebration downtown. By the early 1940s, racial tensions had come to a boiling point due to a lack of adequate housing and endemic racism brought with the thousands of poor Southerners who had moved to Detroit in search of better jobs. On a hot summer night on the 20th of June, 1943, a race riot broke out on Belle Isle amidst vicious rumors on both sides and quickly spread throughout the city. It lasted for 3 days before federal troops regained control. 34 people were killed, 433 were wounded, and $2 million in property was destroyed. Belle Isle, like Detroit, saw rapid growth in construction during the Gilded Age. In 1915, the Belle Isle Bridge burned, and a temporary bridge was erected in its place. Ferries still ran to the island, but on a typical Sunday in 1916, buses carrying 22 people crossed the bridge every 4 minutes. With auto ownership becoming so affordable, the island would see its first traffic jam within the early 20s. In 1902, a modern boat club was built, and in 1904, the largest municipal aquarium opens with 500,000 visitors in the first year. That same year, the conservatory also opened. In 1907, the modern-day casino would open. In 1916, Scott Fountain and the Lagoon were created, using infill from all of the building happening downtown. Belle Isle has always been a perfect escape. During the Spanish influenza outbreak of 1918, many sought refuge on the island, and during the Great Depression, people sought refuge in the natural environment of Belle Isle, a place associated with happier times and prosperity. During the 1940s, the island saw the riots and also saw troops practicing D-Day maneuvers. However, Belle Isle continued to be a place of rest, refuge, and relaxation.